Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. I am today's host, George Smith, and joining me, of course, is our Chief United writer, Mr. Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, how are you, first of all?
Yes, very well, thank you, George. Very well, thank you.
Brilliant. Well, on today's show, Samuel and I are going to reflect on yesterday's 1-1 draw with Arsenal at Old Trafford and look ahead to that big Europa League second leg tie against Real Sociedad on Thursday. But starting with that draw with Arsenal yesterday, Samuel, it turned out to be quite an interesting game, I thought. United second best in the first half, but obviously took the lead right at the end in the first half. Right at the end of it, they took the lead through a brilliant Bruno Fernandes free kick. They improved after the break and probably should have won it, to be fair, but they were denied by a brilliant finish from Declan Rice. Sort of a game of two halves, if you like, into the entertainment value.
Well, I must confess that the first half was so unwatchable and so anodyne that a few of us, myself included, I'm ashamed to add, actually went into the press room before the first half ended and went into the press room, and then all of a sudden I saw Fernandes sizing up this free kick. And I thought, sod's law, this is going to go in here. and I really fancied him to score it. One, because I wasn't in my press, I wasn't in the press box, I wasn't in my seat. But secondly, because it's Fernandes as well, and David Raya, who went on and made a couple of excellent saves in the second half. But he's a goalkeeper who's better with his feet than his hands. And of course, the ball flies in, and there was a United staff member there who was extremely composed when that ball went in. He didn't celebrate at all, and he just said, "Where would we be without him?" And that really does put it mildly as far as Fernandes' influence and an impact on that team is concerned. I think Gary Neville said after the game that Arsenal were better in the first half, yet they conceded and didn't score, and United were better in the second half, yet didn't score and conceded. And it was quite strange like that. I thought Arsenal were really quite, it was really a really regressive performance from Arsenal. And I touched upon these amusing victories that United have had against them, or had against them during Wenger's latter years, with some pretty wild team selections that Sir Alex Ferguson and Louis van Gaal came up with. And yesterday was shaping up to be another one, because looking at that Manchester United team and the bench, they had no right to get anything from that game, really. And I know Arsenal, of course, have got some issues with attackers being out injured, but they did stick 7 goals past PSV Eindhoven in the week. They are second in the table. They would have been big favourites for that game. But Arsenal just meandered through the first half. And I was saying in the blog, I was saying, like, there's got to be a freakish occurrence or something's got to happen out of nothing for United to go 1-0 up here. And if you're a neutral watching that, and as I said, the first half was unwatchable until the goal went in the second minute of added time, you had to hope that United would go 1-0 up, because that would make it a watchable contest. I think if Arsenal had gone 1-0 up in that game, there's no way that United would have come from behind or salvaged it. They'd have probably just petered out very, very quickly and lost quite easily, as well as they have done too often at Old Trafford this season. But the goal really jolted United, and there was a period in the first 15 minutes of the second half which felt like maybe their most uplifting of the season, strangely, even though they had some big opportunities in it. And you sensed at the time that they would curse those chances where Mazraoui, who did very well to connect with Dallow's cross, but just didn't quite put it beyond David Raya's reach as he jutted out his right leg, and Xerxes was far too casual with his flick when the ball came across for his opportunity. And of course, they'd had that warning from Declan Rice with the corner, where inexplicably they left him unattended on the edge of the area, and then somehow nobody got out to actually close down the shot. And then it happens again from open play, and Rice didn't make. It was a very different outcome the second time, but it was. I mean, the second half was a really encouraging performance from United, particularly at home, where their performance level has been so dreadful this season, and we've come to expect them to freeze or not really offer much of note. That they were struggling to do so against Fulham until Chido Obi had the flurry of chances towards the end of the 90 minutes. Then he had another one in extra time, of course. But when you look at that second half, they must have had 4 or 5 great opportunities to either go 2-0 up or win it. The Mazraoui chance, the Xerxes chance, Højlund, you have to say that 2 really good chances. The second one, it's good defending. The first one, it's bad. It's bad centre forward play. And then, of course, right at the very death, Fernandes with that opportunity. And it was bad towards the end, just how open it was. I was quite surprised how the game was, to and fro. And it was a little bit similar to, I suppose, the conclusion of Liverpool United at Anfield, where it looked like Van Dijk had that header where it was going in, and then Xerxes squared and Harry Maguire had the opportunity when he put the ball over the crossbar. So you watch United in that second half in particular, and there's a lot to get behind there. And really, as Amrim said afterwards, he said that half, it has to be used as an example going forward, and in particular against Real Sociedad on Thursday, which is by far and away their biggest game of the season. It's at home as well, so there is that added pressure coming on top of it. But they really need to hit a similar level to that second half yesterday.
Yeah, I thought the second half was really encouraging. It was a massive step up, not that it possibly could have been any worse from the first, but I thought Christian Eriksen, he sort of addressed it post-match in the fact that obviously United had carved out a fair few chances in the second half and probably should have won it. But he also referenced the low block that they'd set up in from the outset of the game. And Ruben Amorim admitted after the game that it wasn't necessarily a way that Manchester United fans want to come and see their team play at Old Trafford. And I thought, fair play to him for admitting that. He realised that there is a demand for attacking football. But ultimately, that approach, it did work to a degree. And United probably should have won it yesterday, to be fair.
Yeah, they were not good to watch in the first half. They were too withdrawn. I thought positionally, having Lindelof in the middle of the 2 centre backs was a risk for a number of reasons. It's always a risk when you put Lindelof in anyway, and it was his first league start since Easter Saturday last year, which was on March 30th against Brentford. But normally the middle of in the back three, the middle defender is the most physical. It's Harry Maguire or it's Matthijs de Ligt, and of course de Ligt was playing yesterday, but he was on the right and Lenny Yoro was on the left. And the thing about Lindelof as well is that where he's not got a lot of pace, he has to compensate for that with his positioning, and so he's likely to drop a little bit deep. And of course, United were very deep yesterday. And I think that contributed to the equalising goal, because you look at how many players are behind the ball. It's 7, 8 players, maybe 9 players. And of course, it's 74th minute and United are 1-0 up. So they are bound to be quite withdrawn at that point against Arsenal. But I do think that contributed to Arsenal eventually getting their goal. I mean, I think that you'd have had long odds on them to have scored their first goal against that United side in the 74th minute. But eventually it came, and it wasn't a huge surprise. It would have been particularly gutting for United that they conceded, purely because they had those 2 fabulous chances for Mazraoui and Xerxes. But Arsenal, you look at their front three, and obviously that there are issues there. I mean, Raheem Sterling he's an out and out forward. He's a winger. He's scored so many big goals in his career for Manchester City, for Liverpool before then, and of course for England, particularly at the Euros in 2021. But something has gone, all right there for him not to even be getting a kick in a game like yesterday. And he's got a dreadful record against United, in fairness. So maybe that came into Mikel Arteta's thinking. I don't think Sterling's ever actually scored against United. But that's where Arsenal let United off the hook. I think Rice described some of their piece of play in the first half on Sky as beautiful. I didn't see an awful lot of beauty. I just saw it quite easy, that you can just knock the ball around in an opponent's final third when the opponent is standing off you and not really pressing. And United didn't get much joy at all until, of course, they won the free kick, and Fernandes does what he does, and he was fortunate to be up against a goalkeeper who somehow let the ball drop in as well. But it was important that Amorim addressed that in his press conference afterwards, about he doesn't want to play that way. And we have heard some United managers. I remember Solskjaer saying after his penultimate game in charge, and it was his final home game in charge against Manchester City, it was such a bad defeat. United only lost 2-0, which doesn't sound a disgrace against City, but it was so bad that they had more attempts on target at their own goal than they did on City's goal. And it was so bad that Pep Guardiola said afterwards, if he was asked, were you disappointed only to have scored 2 goals? He said, no, it's okay. It's okay. It was almost like Ole in, keep him for another 2 weeks. And they did. And then United shipped 4 goals at Watford in his final game. But Solskjaer started that game with a back 3, and he changed it at half-time to a 4-2-3-1. And he admitted afterwards that the way he'd set up, he wasn't pleased with. And it was so bad at that time that Michael Owen, who's, let's face it, he's not a particularly illuminating pundit, but on that occasion, that day, he said afterwards, you can't just go, oh, we're up against a big team this week, let's go to a back 3. Oh, we're up against a smaller team, let's go different this time. But Solskjaer, where he'd entered the end game, and he had form for playing a back 3 against better teams, and he'd done it in response to United being thrashed 5-0 by Liverpool. So it was a back 3 against Tottenham. It was a back 3 against Atalanta, who in fairness do play in that system under Gasperini. And then he keeps it again after 2 positive results against Spurs and Atalanta, win against Spurs, a draw against Atalanta. He did it against City. And then they were found out within about 6 minutes because Eric Bailly put the ball past David De Gea, and United didn't really get a kick in the game. And when a manager is admitting that, that the end game, and that was obviously the case with Solskjaer. Then it's different with Amorim. He's got 10 players out injured, and it's an invidious position to be in. Solskjaer certainly didn't have that many players, not even half that many players unavailable for that City match. And Amorim has not had the benefit of a pre-season. He's not had the benefit of a first summer transfer window. He's coming up against a team that were 12 or 13 places better off than United at kickoff yesterday. The way United played in that first half, it was, as I said, it was unwatchable, but it wasn't a surprise, and it was somewhat understandable. And if you've got a player like Fernandes, who is a moment player, who can just has that bit of stardust, who can, as I said, create something out of nothing, you can somehow go 1-0 up. And Arsenal do have form for letting teams off the hook, and their league form has tailed off, hasn't it, of late? I think they've dropped 7 points in their last 3 games, and that's done it for them as far as a title challenge is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks as though that it's only a matter of time for, obviously, Liverpool wrap that up. But Samuel, you mentioned there, obviously, Bruno Fernandes, a nice segue into my next point. As you said, a staff member said to you in the press room yesterday, where would United be without him? Looked at the numbers, and the answer is they'd be 10 Premier League points worse off than what they are now, which they'd put them in 17th, I think it is. So It just shows how crucial he is with his goals and his assists. And we've seen him raise his game, I think, in the last few weeks. Obviously, he inspired the comeback at Everton. He obviously had a hand in all 3 goals in the game against Ipswich. He got the reply against Fulham last week, and obviously scored again yesterday. And it does beg the question, where would this team be without him? His reliability is so impressive, and he is so crucial to this team. And Ruben Amorim appears to have raised his game after a bit of a sluggish start to the season for him, I would say.
He definitely did, and history repeats itself in that he got a new contract, and essentially it just signalled a drastic and let's face it, deserved pay rise. Only added a year on in terms of the final expiry date, and that happened in April 2022 when I think his contract was running out. It had a maximum expiry date of 2026, and they just upped it to 2027. But he got a lot more money because he'd won the Sir Matt Busby Player of the Year award in his first 2 seasons. But then his form for the rest of that season was atrocious, as most United players' form was under in the final weeks of Ralf Rangnick's reign. And he was not good at the start of the season. I mean, I know they successfully appealed his red card against Tottenham, but that foul was asking for trouble on James Maddison. And Ten Hag tried to use it as a get out, saying that, I deny that result because we were down to 10 men. We shouldn't have been down to 10 men. But United, and Fernandes in particular, have been atrocious before then. I remember saying to someone who works at United in the press room at half time, I said, you should possibly see it as a blessing that he's gone off, because he was absolutely abysmal. And I've done a piece on Fernandes this morning, and I touch upon it, saying that I've lost count the amount of times doing the player ratings where he's provisionally down as a 3 or a 4 out of 10, and then he rockets up to 7 or 8 out of 10 because he's converted a draw or a defeat into a victory, or a draw into a defeat into a draw, as he did at Goodison Park just over 2 weeks ago. And the making of him this season really was the red card at Wolves on Boxing Day, and it was completely deserved, that red card. It was for 2 bookable offences, 2 daft bookings, particularly the second one, given that he'd already been carded. And when he walked off, he was blanked by Ruben Amorim, and that's always going to be a gut punch for a player. And I'm not blaming Amorim for that whatsoever. I think a manager should be blanking a player. I remember Solskjaer on his final game in charge at Watford. Harry Maguire, of course, was sent off with United only 2-1 down and threatening a comeback because they were playing quite well in the second half. And Solskjaer high-fived him when he came off. And I thought, why are you doing that? And if you're a manager in that position, you should be not even giving the player the time of day. But Fernandes' first game back was at Anfield, and he was brilliant. He was so good that day. I'm even struggling. I don't think he was playing. He might have been playing on the left. Was it that? Not on the left, sorry. I'm struggling to remember where he was playing. But he seemed like there was a positional tweak there. He might have been, in essence, one of the 2 number 10s, but he was withdrawing a lot. And Opta put out afterwards that he created 4 chances that day, which is the most by United playing a league game at Anfield since Opta started compiling that data in 2003 or 4. But sometimes, with him, you don't need to look at the stats. You feel his presence, you feel his significance. It's ridiculous in the Ipswich game that he's only been given 1 assist, when the first goal, the cross comes in from him, dead ball kick, and it's an own goal. That's him creating a goal. He created pretty much all 3 goals that evening because United's goals came from set pieces. And clearly there's been some good work conducted there by him and his namesake, Carlos Fernandes, who's of course overseeing the set pieces as Ruben Amorim's assistant. And really, when he scored yesterday, I wonder if he actually knew where Roy Keane was sat, because Roy Keane, the Sky studio is above. It is up the Stretford end, but it's above the other corner. And I wonder if Fernandes was made, if he knew that, would he have gone charging in celebration towards the other corner? Because he's made Keane look pretty daft. And what Keane came out with the other week was just drivel. And he came out with more drivel yesterday, saying that, we used to get booed when we got a draw. Honestly, I cannot ever recall that happening during Roy Keane's time at United, where a draw would be booed by supporters. You'd have to rack your brains considerably and maybe even try and watch every game back or find the footage of it to determine that. But there are some players in the United squad who get bogged down by criticism. And as Amorim said recently, they take it personally. You think of all the flack that Fernandes has had over the years, all the flack he's had from fans on the terraces, pundits descending into pub talk, talking about his captaincy and his whinging. And sometimes he does invite it because he does whinge a lot, but he steps up every time. And what I liked about him long before he scored that free kick yesterday, was that there was that early mix-up between Casemiro and De Ligt where they tackled each other, and the loose ball could have squirmed into the path of Merino or Nwaneri or Trossard. It just went to Onana. They got let off the hook. And De Ligt and Casemiro high-five each other. And I'm thinking, you should be berating each other or effing and blinding each other or squaring up to each other. And then Dalot later on, or a few moments later, he had the ball in a reasonable position, and he made backward pass. The crowd sighed in exasperation at that. The next time the ball went dead, Fernandes had a whinge at him. And I thought, that's the standard I would want from a Manchester United player or a Manchester United captain. And he continues to set them. And it's, as far as that Sir Matt Busby Player of the Year statue is concerned, I don't think they need to take it away from the Fernandes household this season. It's going to be staying there.
No, most probably not. I think Ahmad might have been in with a shout of it had he not picked up his injury, but it certainly looks as though Bruno Fernandes will be keeping hold of that on his mantelpiece for now. But regarding the team selection yesterday, Samuel, obviously you mentioned it on Victor Lindelof came in and started in the back three. Christian Eriksen also came in to replace Rasmus Højlund, which meant Joshua Zirkzee was pushed further forward into the number 9 position. We talked a lot about Joshua Zirkzee on Friday, about how much he's improved as that number 10. And I think that was on show yesterday. It's quite clear he has not got the necessary traits to be the leading striker in this Manchester United team.
No, I thought in the first half in particular, he was trying to buy phantom fouls. And I know Gabriel and Saliba are physical centre-backs, but that if anything, knowing that, you've got to be as physical. You've got to be, putting yourself up against them. I think if anything, Højlund was maybe more of a physical threat when he came on. I mean, Gabriel had to get really touch tight with him to block that near post chance that he had. That was good centre forward play from Højlund. He was constantly on his toes, looking for the ball, anticipating that Collier was going to be used on the overlap where the ball would come at the near post. He was quite unlucky there. It was just very good defending. The first chance he had, it was just bad centre forward play. He did not have a clue where Declan Rice was. He thought he had all the time in the world. A really good striker. They have it's almost like they've got what Spider-Man has, that the Spidey sense or whatever it's called. They know where opponents are. And Højlund, if he's cute about it, he takes the first touch and ensures that his body is in the way so that if Rice does try and nick the ball off him, he's taking him out and he's giving away a penalty. It was a great opportunity for him, even though he didn't get a shot off there. But Højlund was definitely dropped. I don't think you can say it was an element of rotation. There were only 2 changes made yesterday. One of them was enforced with Dorgu coming out of the team because he was serving the second of his 3-match suspension. So the only unenforced change was Højlund coming out and Eriksen coming in, which I agree with. It's not ideal. I think there's a case to do it again on Thursday, purely because the pace of the game will be slower. I think that will be more up Eriksen's street, and he is someone who normally you can trust to keep the ball in those circumstances. He has been quite good off the bench a few times this season as well, so that is something to keep in mind. But what I liked about Højlund yesterday, even though he made a pig's ear of the first chance he got, was that, and I've been saying this before, and I've said it before about countless other players, if you drop a player to the bench and you bring them on, the chances are you'll get a reaction from them, because suddenly they're out of their comfort zone. They know they're not just starting by default every week and just going through the same routine, and essentially you're just prolonging the problem there. And Højlund should have been dropped a lot sooner than he was by Amorim. But the fact that he was in place for 2 good opportunities, weirdly, you have to see that as some form of progress, even though, as I said, he completely mucked up the first opportunity, but his centre forward play for the second one, that's what you want from him. And you don't see that enough from him. I think Jermaine Defoe was talking about, after Spurs beat United last month, about Højlund's foot patterns. And I thought it was a really interesting bit of analysis that they probably should have dwelt on a lot more. And Defoe was a very good Premier League striker. He was brilliant in the box, but he was also great outside the box in terms of getting shots off quickly. I think Harry Kane said how he learned a lot from training and watching Defoe with his ball striking technique. And Højlund's foot patterns for that second opportunity he had yesterday were good, and it required excellent defending from one of the best centre-backs in the Premier League to thwart him. But you are not going to get that from Zirkzee. And that opportunity he had, even his goal last week against Sociedad, some would say it was coolly taken. It was also very casually taken. He didn't generate a lot of pace on the ball whatsoever. It was really poor goalkeeping to let a shot like that end up in the back of the net. But that is his it's his style, and it's another reason why they shouldn't have signed him, even though he's done reasonably okay of late, and you can see he is quite a decent footballer. But his skill set, it's just not what United needed whatsoever. They need. I mean, Xerxes, you could see why he did quite well in Serie A, because it's going to be a slower pace. It's different in the Premier League, and he didn't really get up to speed at all yesterday. He contributed quite well to that breakaway where Mazraoui's shot was saved by Raya. But for his chance, he doesn't need to flick the ball there. If he just gathers it with his right boot and then he has a look, he'll have seen that the goal was pretty much open because of Raya's positioning, and he probably would have scored and made it 2-0. But he likes those flicks. He likes that delicate approach to attacking, and it doesn't always 30 yards from goal if you're building up an attack, and he has got that in him. But that's why, as you just said, George, he is better in a withdrawn role. But United didn't need another number 10, a Maverick style player in the summer. They needed another number 9 who would stay high up the pitch and who would certainly alleviate the burden on Højlund.
Yeah, definitely. And some quite interesting comments that have come out this morning from Ronald Koeman, the Netherlands boss, who's left Joshua Zirkzee out of his provisional squad, saying that he doesn't consider him good enough at the minute to get into the Netherlands team, which is quite interesting. He's been left out for their Nations League doubleheader with Spain that's coming up later this month. But looking at the other end of the pitch, Samuel, in the second half yesterday, we saw Ayden Heaven get his second appearance for the club, came on for Lenny Euro at half-time. And once again, I thought he looked quite accomplished and quite solid defensively. And we've seen him twice on the bench now against Fulham last weekend and yesterday, and he's not really put a foot wrong, has he?
No, he did very well. Did very, very well. It was a colourful analysis of him afterwards by Amrim as well. Amrim said he's so relaxed. Sometimes he's too relaxed, but we think we have a player there, and he only turned 18 in September. He is a very, very raw centre back, and it's pretty good going to come into two quite high pressure testing occasions, such as a extra time in an FA Cup, 5th round tie, and then at home to Arsenal, of course, his former club, for 45 minutes with United 1-0 up. And as you said, he didn't really do anything wrong, and he got the crowd on side quite quickly. He's got them on side from the very start, but I think he endeared himself even more just by the way he went about the game. And that's something to work towards, of course. It's going to be a big ask for him to be starting games in succession between now and the end of the season. I think if United's season was to end effectively on Thursday, then you'd be inclined to give him that regular run of playing time just to build him up ahead of next season, because there's not a great deal of risk other than just playing for places in the Premier League, which financially there is a motivation there, and United don't want to just completely toss off the Premier League season. They need to strive for as high a finish as possible, even though the players, I think, are going to be by and large extremely demotivated if they end up in that scenario with them out of the Europa League. But as Amrim said, he's someone to for them to control. He used the word control just to kind of like downplay his Premier League debut, move on, and I suppose he's got an outside chance if Lenny Oro is injured for the Sociedad game of starting that. But I think we all know that even if he is, even if Yoro is out for that match, the back three will be Mazraoui going back to centre back with De Ligt and Lindelof. But he's a player for the long term. Lindelof won't be there next season either. So just as long as he keeps on coming in, getting a reasonable amount of playing time, and look, he will make a mistake at some point, and he shouldn't be demonised for that, because, as I've said several times, newly signed or recently signed Manchester United centre backs, they tend to have a very, very difficult game or two at the start of their career, whether you're Gary Pallister in the 5-1 at Main Road or Jaap Stam up against Nicola Anelka. It's that they tend to struggle at the start, or they can have that baptism of fire. The most, I suppose the most relevant example in recent years would be Lisandro Martinez away at Brentford in his second game, being hooked at half time with United 4-0 down. It doesn't get much worse than that. And Matthias de Ligt on his full debut, United lost 3-0 at home to Liverpool. So he shouldn't. When that mistake happens, and it will happen, don't worry about it. Just look at what's gone on before him. So far so good for him. And I think he's probably surprised a lot of people, given how little he'd played at Arsenal, to have come in and had a couple of opportunities at United and to have performed as well as he has done is very, very encouraging.
Yeah, I think yesterday was the longest amount of time he spent on the pitch at any given moment as a first team player. I think he only played 10 minutes worth of first team football at
would have
Arsenal.
been in the League Cup, wasn't it? I think
League Cup away at Preston, I think it was earlier this season. So first signs look encouraging for Ayden Heaven. But that does conclude part 1 of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Do rejoin us in part 2, where we'll look ahead to Thursday's clash with Real Sociedad. Welcome back to part 2 of this Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. As I mentioned a few moments ago, we are now going to switch our focus to what is quite simply Manchester United's biggest game of the season by quite some distance. Real Sociedad part 2 on Thursday night at Old Trafford. The ties finally poised, Samuel, at 1-1 after the first leg. United no doubt kicking themselves they didn't win it, particularly when there was obviously so much debate about the penalty that was given. And here we go again, season on the line. It's a must-win game, simple as that.
Yeah, Sociedad lost again at the weekend as well. I think at home to Sevilla. So I think that's 3 on the spin that they've lost in La Liga against. I mean, the first 2 were against Barcelona and Real Madrid, but Sevilla aren't really quite the force that they used to be. But as we saw from Sociedad last week, they are not. I mean, United are not a good side, but Sociedad are not a good side either. You can entirely see why Anthony has torn it up in Spain. That it's a league that feels like it's on its knees, apart from with the top 3 with the 2 Madrid clubs and Barcelona, and there'll be another Madrid derby in the Champions League this week, which I'm sure will be very watchable. But I still fancy United to go through. It helped that they played well in the second half yesterday at home as well, because, as I said, their home form this season and their performances at home have been a really big problem. And Amorim has not sugarcoated it either. If anything, he's publicised it more than any journalist has, in terms of their write-ups from Old Trafford or their analysis of home games. And they need a performance. They need a win. It wouldn't surprise me if it does go beyond the 90 minutes as well. Just looking at the 2 teams in San Sebastian and the way they went about their game, I can't imagine Sociedad will play as badly as they did against United in the first leg, and that may be the real point of concern for United, because they should have scored at least 2 goals in Spain. If they'd maybe gone 2-0 up, then that would have been particularly deflating for Sociedad. And would Sociedad have had the wherewithal to get anything back in that game? You can't know for certain. But United rarely go 2-0 up in games, and it's a night where we could all do with them going 2-0 up in games, because we don't want to be getting home at gone 1 a.m. or well gone midnight. We want it wrapped up in 90 minutes, and we want United, for selfish purposes, to stay in the Europa League, because it means there's something riding on the season going into April and then hopefully May, and then it's probably Lyon in the quarterfinals. But United, even when they played really well yesterday in the second half against Arsenal, the lack of goals in the team, it's a huge problem. As I said, I think they probably had 5 great chances in the second half against Arsenal alone. And when you're doing that against a team as good as Arsenal are, and as good as Arsenal are defensively as well, that is really encouraging. But it's the big caveat is that they didn't score any of those opportunities. They scored with their trickiest chance yesterday, and I know that there was all that a lot of people were chuntering on about the distance of the wall and what have you, and of course David Raya, his goalkeeping was not great for the free kick, but United had better chances in that match to score, and they didn't take any of them. So that is always going to be, it's not going to be at the back of their mind. I think it's going to be at the forefront of their mind. And I really do hope that they surprise us and everyone by being particularly clinical on Thursday night and making it a serene evening for everyone. My gut feeling somehow tells me that it won't be plain sailing. It's very rarely been plain sailing for them this season.
Well, fingers crossed. I'm looking at the numbers. They've only had one home defeat in the last 6 in regulation time. So there is encouragement, albeit slowly from a very low bar, that things are gradually improving, but we don't want extra time on Thursday night. We would like it wrapped up as soon as possible. You spoke to Ruben Amorim after the game, as always, yesterday, Samuel, and he confirmed that Manuel Ugarte is back in contention. Big boost if that turns out to be the case. He'll be at open training on Wednesday morning. We'll see if he's part of the main group. It would be a big boost to have him back, and you would think he will replace Casemiro in a like-for-like swap in midfield if he's fit enough to start.
Yeah, even though Casemiro actually had quite a good week, I thought he was probably the most consistent performer against Sociedad in the first leg, and he did get stronger as the game went on, rather surprisingly, against Arsenal, when the pace is, of course, quicker. United, mentally, that was a lot more challenging because Arsenal had more of the ball, and maybe in a way actually suits them that United played in such a low block. And I actually hate using that phrase, low block, but there you've converted me briefly there, or you've duped me into using it. But it probably did help. I mean, last season, how many times was there this yawning chasm between the defence and the midfield? Those days appear to have ended, and there is a bit more tactical discipline in terms of shielding the goal, even though it was eventually breached by Rice yesterday. And I do half wonder whether Amorim, Ugarte won't have played since, when will it have been, the Fulham game on early March, was it? So March the 2nd, I think. And I don't think he didn't even last the hour in that match. So there would be an element of risk in someone in who has not played in the best part of 2 weeks in the biggest game of the season. So maybe there is a case actually to stick with Casemiro and bank on him to produce another pretty decent performance after having probably his best week, or one of his best weeks of the season, with the 2 matches last week. But certainly at the start of it, I wouldn't have thought that Casemiro could start 3 games within the space of a week. He's 33. It's quite taxing, of course, with the games piling up. That said, he's not played as much this season as he has in previous seasons. I think between the Newcastle game, after the Newcastle game on January 30th, he didn't appear again for United until he came on as a substitute against FCSB exactly a month later. So he should have some relative freshness about him. And he has been, I think he's been injury-free for the entirety of the season. So look, these are words I never thought I would necessarily say, but there is definitely a case to stick with Casemiro going into this game against Sociedad, rather than just bringing Ugarte back in and hoping he can do the job. But they may have to take some risks, and that would be perfectly understandable, because the next game is Leicester away, which United should win. It's one of the few games United should win because Leicester is so bad. Secondly, it's the Premier League. The Premier League is pretty much write-off for United this season. Well, not pretty much. It is a write-off this season. And also, after the Leicester game, they don't play for 16 days. So with certain players, depending on their fitness, I think there must be a slight temptation, or there could be a temptation to play them, just because the risk would be worth it, and because it is, as we've just both agreed, it is their biggest game of the season.
Yeah, I think Ruben Amorim may just have to throw caution to the wind. Obviously, if it is within reason, you don't want to risk making anything worse, as he mentioned before the first leg last week. But the other 33-year-old midfielder in United's pool of midfielders is Christian Eriksen, of course, who we spoke about a little earlier on. Would you be inclined, Samuel, to possibly keep him in the starting 11 on Thursday night? You mentioned about, obviously, the slower pace of this game compared to the Premier League, but will there be a temptation to bring Rasmus Højlund back in and maybe push Joshua Zirkzee back to that number 10? Chido Obi obviously unavailable for this one. So again, options in attack are pretty limited.
Yeah, I think the fact that Xerxes would be the starter if Ericsson was also will also be to start. That is a con, particularly after the way Xerxes played against Arsenal. I think that Amrim, I wouldn't be surprised if he's thinking, yeah, I'm just not, I'm not out of principle playing that guy as the number 9 again. It's just not a role that he's suited to whatsoever. The more you watch him, the more strange it feels that he was actually ever regarded as a number 9. And but you bring Højlund in, do you increase your chances of scoring? The evidence would suggest not, when he's just gone. That was his 20th game without a goal at the weekend. That cameo against Arsenal. So that, look, we always say it is a cliche. Like, managers always have big calls to make, but you could really debate until the cows come home as to what attack that Amrim goes with, and Amrim could be debating it for days on end. He's got the time between now and the match on Thursday. Open training on Wednesday morning will be very keenly observed, because everyone will be interested to see which players, if any, are out of the physio's room and on the training pitch participating in the session. United really could do with some options, even not necessarily players who you'd have down to start, just to pad out the bench, because, as I said, extra time is a possibility, and you want to have the option of bringing some fresh legs in, some potential game changers. As you touched upon earlier with Ericsson, that is, I think, I might wake up tomorrow morning and think something completely differently, or I might just change my mind in a minute. But I can see why you'd start Højlund and keep Ericsson in reserve, because I think Ericsson would be a good player to bring on in a game like the Sociedad one. Alternatively, do you want to keep the ball from the start and play on the front foot? Then there is merit in having Ericsson in the team to do that, because normally he does treasure the ball. I don't think he played particularly well against Arsenal, but he didn't have a lot of the ball. He was chasing shadows a lot of the time, but he still put in a pretty good shift. I think he was pressing in the 72nd or 73rd minute just before he came off. So they are getting something out of him, even when he's not doing an awful lot with the ball. But that is quite a big debate. I think it's not necessarily something that I think a lot of United fans will be fixated on, and whether Ericsson's in the team or Højlund's in the team when the starting 11 is confirmed, it's not going to cause it's not going to be a seismic selection in the slightest. But it could be one of the most important selections Amrim makes, depending on if any other players, if any of the injured players are available. But just going from his answer to me yesterday, I mean, sometimes when he says, I don't know, he's got an idea. And if he's just mentioning Ugarte as one who could come back, I don't think anybody should be surprised if Ugarte is the only one who comes back from injury.
Yeah, maybe we shall see. Obviously, Patrick Dorgu to come back from his ban again temporarily before being suspended again for the Leicester game at the weekend. But just to wrap up, Samuel, away from the pitch, there was obviously a big protest that took place ahead of the game on Sunday. Our colleague Tyrone Marshall followed the march from the Tollgate pub to Old Trafford. He estimated around 5,000 or so were on the march. They certainly made their voices heard. The coverage was quite expansive from both ourselves and other media outlets. And by the looks of it, it was a good turnout. But obviously the big question is, will the point get across? We will see. Yeah,
it's important to give those protests their due coverage, and the fact we had a reporter there, we had a videographer there, we had a live blog going of it as well. That shows how dedicated we are to covering it, and we were always going to be dedicating resources to it. It worked out well for Ty as well, because he got back in time for kickoff. I remember when I went out for a protest a few years ago, before the Norwich game, the shutters came down and we couldn't actually get back into the press room. We had to, the rescue party had to come to us, and we were let back into the stadium through the main entrance in the East Stand, and were guided through the labyrinthine corridors back into the Sir Bobby Charlton stand and into the press box. So at least he made kickoff, but you could smell the smoke from outside the ground. You could hear the supporters in the tunnel as well, because of course the Munich tunnel goes through the South Stand. It's the Sir Bobby Charlton stand, but a lot of people still call it the South Stand. That's where media entrances as well. That's the entrances in that tunnel. And it continued into the game. I mean, the atmosphere was actually quite subdued in the first half because United were not. I mean, they were barely playing, and then it was rocking at one point in the second half. As I said, it's important to cover these things. From what I was told, people at the club, the presence of Edward Glazer there was not a reaction to the protest. His attendance had long been planned. It was interesting that Sky didn't actually pick up on his presence in the director's box either. He sat right in front of Sir Jim Ratcliffe, but there was no mention of him. When the camera was homed in on Ratcliffe, it was just on Ratcliffe, and rather than taking in the fact that Edward Glazer was present as well. But he's not been one of the more visible Glazers. It's normally Joel or Avram. That said, Joel has not attended a Manchester United match at Old Trafford since April 2019. But will it have any effect? Unfortunately, I don't think it will. We've seen protests similar to this in the past. I've enormous respect for the United fans who continue to fight the good fight and try to keep pressure up on the owners, and they're fighting for a better ownership, better club. But the Glazer family have been in situ for nearly 20 years. I hope it's not another 2 years, never mind another 20 years. But it really wouldn't surprise me, because they do seem pretty undeterred by anything that happens. And the important thing with protests as well is that they are peaceful, and that was a peaceful protest yesterday. From what Ty said, he said that it dispersed pretty much as kickoff loomed, because a lot of people wanted to get in and watch the football, or go to the pub and watch the football. I imagine quite a lot of the protesters were ticketless yesterday, as they were for that Norwich match 3 years ago. It was nearly, but that it's very vivid. It got good coverage across UK media. It would have been, well, you'd have had worldwide media presence there as well, I'd imagine. So credit to them, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's another protest before the end of the season.
Yeah, I think it's very much possible. And like you said, Samuel, you've got to give respect to those who did turn out yesterday and continue to sort of bang the drum against the ownership model. But that does mark the end of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts from. Also, make sure you leave a like and comment as well. We'll be back again on Friday to reflect on the clash with Sociedad and look ahead to Sunday's Premier League trip to Leicester. Evening kickoff for that one as well, if you weren't aware. So make sure you are subscribed when that drops, and we'll catch you again later in the week for another episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show.